tour on water and sanitation emphasised that, quote, states cannot meet their human rights obligations without addressing stigma as a root cause of discrimination and other human rights violations. The aim of this parallel event is to bring together different stakeholders to address water and sanitation issues with the view to identify strategies for preventing stigmatisation that affects the most vulnerable and marginalised groups. So we have a panel of 3 speakers to address you on this topic. On my right, Peter Prove is the Executive Director of the Evangelical Advocacy Alliance here in Geneva and is the former Assistant to the General Secretary for International Affairs and Human Rights in the Lutheran World Federation. A lawyer by profession, he has had extensive experience of engagement with UN human rights and economic policy forums. He served as President of the Special Committee of NGOs on Human Rights from 2000 to 2008 and was a founding member of the International Dalit Solidarity Network and of the International NGO Committee on Human Rights in Trade and Investment. Micah Gorsborg, on my left, is coordinator of the Ecumenical Water Network at the World Council of Churches. That's an international network of churches and Christian organisations which strives to promote the preservation, responsible management and the equitable distribution of water for all, based on the understanding that water is a gift of God and a fundamental human right. Previously, Michael worked for Franciscains International and read for the World Germany on the right to water and advocacy. And thirdly, on my far left, Attilio Galimberti is a member of the secular Franciscan order in Italy. He has served on the board of Franciscains International for a number of years and is currently a member of the Inter-Franciscan Commission on Justice and Peace. He has a particular interest in this issue and was very active in the successful campaign of opposing the proposed privatisation of water in Italy. So we will listen to each of our speakers in turn and then we'll take any questions. So I now invite Peter Prove to speak to us. Peter, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brian. I'm grateful for leading this discussion and giving us an opportunity to reflect on it. I represent the Ecumenical Advocacy Alliance, which is a global network of churches and related organisations collaborating in advocacy on a certain number of defined, agreed issues. And I'm very, very pleased that Franciscains International is one of those valued members in that global network. The issues that we're currently focusing our work on are on HIV and AIDS and on food security. And one of the things that I think the experience of all of our members indicates is that stigma and discrimination are really a key in addressing the nuts and bolts of HIV and AIDS and access to health services, and in addressing sustainable food security for communities. I've been also, I think, very inspired by the work of some of the groups that work particularly closely with communities who live in extreme poverty. Not from an academic point of view, but from a practical point of view of engaging with those people and communities themselves who live that experience, not speaking on their behalf. Activities which seek to empower the communities and the people themselves. And I like the philosophy that they express, and I think which is shared by many of us in the faith-based sector working in this field. And that is to the effect, essentially, that extreme poverty is not only, or not even necessarily primarily, a matter of lack of income or lack of economic resources. It is a function of systemic discrimination and stigmatization. Poor people, or people living in extreme poverty, in many cases, remain poor because they are stigmatized by poverty. And the poverty that attaches to their identity is passed on from generation to generation. And this is a point that I think is picked up in the report that is, I think, an inspiration for this gathering here today. So it's not just a function of economic disenfranchisement, it is a function of discrimination based upon the status of people and communities living in poverty. Now, I also have some experience relating to this sort of concern from my work with and on behalf of Dalit communities. As was mentioned, I was a founding member of the International Dalit Solidarity Network, a constituency that was just meeting in this room before us. And certainly it's a common experience of Dalit communities that they are systemically excluded from essential services including water and sanitation on the basis of their inherited stigma as untouchables. So, and this is very emblematic of the topic we're talking about now. So Dalit individuals and communities are routinely excluded from accessing water sources in villages where they live, from accessing sanitation facilities, and indeed are deployed in some cases as the service providers in cleaning up human excrement, in cleaning up that which is impure or polluted or polluting, dead bodies and the like. So there's this dreadful cycle of stigmatization, discrimination and marginalization that affects communities like that in every way in terms of accessing essential services and the basic conditions for a life in dignity. It's a real snapshot of exactly the issue that is being raised through this report by the Special Rapporteur on the right to safe drinking water and sanitation. And I must say, I'm grateful to her for having brought this issue to the fore. I do think that it is a threshold issue. It is the fundamental precondition for being able to access rights and the means of securing rights, not to be marginalized from within your community. It's a threshold issue to confront this challenge of stigmatization and social exclusion before we can begin to talk about the realization of the most fundamental human rights, civil and political and economic, social and cultural. So I'm grateful that she's brought it to the table. I'm aware that there is quite a lot of critique now by states about introducing a new language, a new term into an agreed discourse on discrimination. I understand that, and I'm certainly not advocating for yet more conventions, yet more standards, yet more terminology to explain what we know is a reality. But I do think it's important to understand the drivers that prevent human rights from even being put on the table. And stigma and the sorts of inherited, systematized discrimination that is picked up in her report, that is a key issue. So I'm grateful to her. And I hope that she gets sufficient support to be able to explore this issue further and to really dig at that threshold issue that is the key obstacle to even recognition of human dignity, let alone legal enforcement of human rights. I also think that it's helpful to take up this issue in a practical, concrete context of how this sort of system of discrimination and marginalization through stigmatizing attitudes, how that actually plays out in a specific context. In this case, access to water and sanitation services. It makes it real. It gives us something concrete to work with and a prism through which to address the larger systemic concern of stigmatization. So I hope that it can be pursued through this and other concrete situations or frameworks rather than in the abstract, which we know, those of us who've been working in the UN context for some years, we know that there's no future in ongoing abstract discussions. The issue of human rights needs to be made real, it needs to be made concrete, and it needs to be addressed at the level of implementation. And so I will close my introductory remarks by referring to a statement made by, in fact, the founder of the ATD Fourth World Movement, Father Joseph Rosinski, who said, or who led a movement that was about changing the ways in which society sees people living in poverty and addresses the issue of social exclusion. And he said, we are not here to manage poverty or to reduce it. We are here to destroy it. And I think if we can begin to address this issue of stigmatization and social exclusion, we will be on the way to destroying extreme poverty. Thank you.
International very much for giving me the opportunity to contribute to this panel. As Brian has said, I'm working at the World Council of Churches as coordinator of the Ecumenical Water Network, which is a network of churches and related organizations specifically promoting fair sharing and equitable access to water. That's what we attempt to do, and one of the approaches we've been following these past years has been to raise awareness about water as a human right among churches and related organizations. And at the same time, we've been trying to contribute to these ongoing discussions here at the UN Human Rights Council, and have been working with Katharina and Albuquerque's mandate and have supported this mandate. Before what I would like to focus on is specifically actually the role of churches in addressing stigmatization as one of the root causes of discrimination. And before I start with that, I'd just like to repeat a few key points from Katharina's report. And I think the first one was, what is it that we call stigma? I think it might help to start with that. And Katharina Albuquerque in her report defines stigma as the process of dehumanizing, of devaluating people. And it is regarding people because of their characteristics or perceived characteristics as inferior. And often stigma is connected with a feeling of disgust. And I think that you can see that there's a difference between other reasons for discrimination. And this is very much about being discriminated against because you don't fit into the normal social norms of the time. And one point I find very important from Katharina's report is that discrimination that is a result of stigma is often perceived as legitimate. People think it's okay, maybe even called for, to discriminate against stigmatized people because they are inferior in people's minds. So while with other forms of discrimination, it might be easier to explain to the people who are causing the discrimination why they should be stopping this. They might even see, oh yes, well, we're discriminating against these people and that's wrong. But if the reason for this discrimination is stigma, it might be a lot more difficult to convince people that this is an illegitimate form of discrimination. The last point I want to highlight from Katharina's report, that it's not sufficient to only look at discrimination as the reason for why entire groups of people are left out with regards to access to water and sanitation. And you need to, as Brian has pointed out, look at stigmatization as one of the root causes for discrimination to successfully be able to address discrimination. So, having said that, coming to the role of churches, also part related to that role of the ecumenical movement we're trying to take on. I think it's probably clear for all of us here that exclusion from access to water and sanitation as a consequence of stigma is very much an ethical and moral concern. And well, as are all forms of exclusion from access to water and sanitation. I think all forms of discrimination are obviously ethical and moral concerns. But what I think makes stigmatization special is that it's very much something that requires change of heart and mind if we want to address it successfully. And there I see that churches, as well as other Christian churches, but also other faith organizations, faith institutions, can play a very important role alongside, obviously, other stakeholders from government, from civil society. And I think one contribution churches and related organizations can make is very simply to underline the dignity of every single person and the unacceptability of social exclusion based on that belief of the dignity of every single person and addressing how social exclusion is